Hey, it's another episode of Film Streak. It's been a minute. I took a little break. I had some other things going on, but I'm back with another episode and we're watching some new movies. And, we're here in October. I think October, I really like this time of year. I like this month of the year because this is when all the horror movies roll out. This is when we dig into the franchises. Maybe we'll watch some of the old favorites. This with Film Streak, I'm trying to watch new things, of course. So I'm looking for new angles on this. Give me something that's scary or suspenseful or thrilling, but not the usual stuff. The slashers and all that. I mean, it's tradition, I suppose, but I'm looking for something a little bit different. So this episode, I want to talk about a very specific sort of subgenre, maybe, of films that are about space or space travel or astronauts or space exploration, but involve some sort of element of horror or suspense, something like that, right? A lot of times these are going to be basically science fiction films, but every once in a while there's something that it just tries something a little different. And here, this episode, I wanted to focus on not necessarily a very specific lane, but you'll see. I think you might see there are some threads that these films are going to have in common. And before I did that, I kind of went through my mind of like, okay, what would I watch? And I went through some of the favorites or the more well-worn selections that are out there, right? So whether it's something like Event Horizon, I remember watching that when it came out years and years ago. It still has some things that I like about it. Some of it I don't think has aged so well. Sunshine. Oh man, I really love Sunshine. If you've never seen that, by Danny Boyle. It's funny, the whole cast in that film has gone on to do incredible things over the years. But when that film came out, I mean, there was just something special about it. And I still think it holds up, actually. There's other films. Let me see if I can think of some more. I mean, of course, I think a lot of this, as I probably talked about in a previous episode, a lot of this probably spawned or you could trace back to Alien, right? And the idea of being in space and, the whole thing in space, no one can hear you. And, in space, no one can hear you scream. Actually, that should probably be the tagline, right? In space, no one can hear you. See? It works, technically. Still, there's a whole lane of these films that are about these people, whether it's like passengers or a crew that are stuck together in a situation and they have to figure it out. And sometimes there's a monster. Sometimes it's just like a race against the clock. There's something that is happening that they have to figure it out. And I think that's where I like the element of horror that comes into this, is that the real danger is space itself, is the environment itself, right? Even if you take away the monsters or the aliens or the supernatural stuff, just being in space is dangerous enough all on its own. It's unlike any environment that we have or can experience here on Earth. I think that already puts it above a certain level in terms of the terror that you can generate for a story. So anyway, let me get into some of these films. The first one I really want to talk about, because I saw a trailer for it a little while back and I never caught it in theaters, but I did get to finally watch it on, one of the streamers. It's called I.S.S. And this is a film that, watching the trailer and just the very loose premise of it, it seems so intriguing. And it's one of those I'm like, what? How did no one ever make this film before? But the premise of this film is that you've got these astronauts, you've got the crew of the International Space Station, and they're orbiting Earth, and they're just kind of doing what those folks do up there. And just all of a sudden, one day, like nuclear war breaks out on Earth. And so the crew are witnessing all of this from miles and miles above, and they have no idea what to do next. And then they start to receive communications. They start to get a sense of like what is really going on. And of course, it's an international space station. So you have Russian cosmonauts, you have American astronauts, and you have this sort of underlying conflict that is dormant, but in a situation like this becomes very prominent. It becomes the main dramatic hinge for this whole story. And so then it's a matter of, well, who's going to be the first to blink in a way? And in a situation, in an environment where any wrong move can mean disaster for everybody, it becomes a very tense situation. So to me, that's a great premise. Like, why? How has no one made this film yet? So I really was excited to watch this. And I got to say, though, watching the film itself, it has some interesting points to it and some approaches to how this situation would play out. I think for me, though, it comes down to the cast, maybe. It never really feels like there's a lot of chemistry between everybody. And it also feels like some people are in different movies. It's got some elements of, you got to take a couple of leaps, right, to kind of go with some of the decisions that are made. And then when they make a decision that seems kind of sideways, then I'm really taken aback. It kind of removes me from whatever I thought should happen or wanted to happen. And it kind of breaks the movie in a way. And so I think it's a really noble and solid effort to tell a story like this, because I mean, especially even in today's world, right? Like, this film is not very old. I think it's only a year or two old maybe at this point, but the element of characters in this story that are from Russia, it plays a little different now than it might have when they were making this film. I could see that happening. And so, I don't know if I was entirely invested in the characters. I did want to understand and get a sense of how this could play out, this situation, this scenario. So I was a little disappointed by it, I guess. Overall, I think it's well done. It's put together well, but I just think it's some of the acting or the cast that it didn't really hold together for me. And so with that in mind, I said, all right, well, look, that's a very recent film. Let me go back. Let me explore this subgenre of films and let me see if I can find something else. And so, talking about Alien, of course, that kind of being a turning point, at least in my eyes, for where this genre took off. I had never seen the film that was kind of responsible for Alien happening, which was Dark Star. And that's directed by John Carpenter. And there are elements of that film. Dark Star is, from what I can read and what I've seen, it is essentially like a satire or like a dark comedy, but it's played in a very similar structure as Alien. And my understanding is that things and ideas in this film that maybe just didn't come off or never got really explored, they were kind of reused or repurposed in making Alien. Because Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, is in this film. And so there is a connection. There is a little bit of genetic overlap between the two films, right? And this one, I got to say, it's from 1974. It's a 50-year-old film at this point. And it's very clearly a first effort. It's John Carpenter. But this was before Halloween. This is before all of his run throughout the 70s and 80s of really perfecting his approach to practical effects and his sort of visual style. And so it looks very rough. It looks like a student film. And it is a student film in part. And so you have to kind of you got to grade it on a curve, I suppose. I didn't find it very satirical. I found it, honestly, just kind of poorly done. And, maybe I'm grading it with the wrong eyes. Maybe. I don't know. But the thing I give it points for, though, is that the level of visual effects and special effects and the set design and the production quality, even though it's very low budget or no budget, you can see that whoever was behind it, the imagination was working overtime. Like there's a lot that's set up in the film, a lot that you see on camera, on screen, that is clearly worked on. It's clearly put together. It doesn't seem lazy necessarily. It seems low budget, but it doesn't seem lazy. They really tried. And I got to give it points for that. Because it's easy to make something and just kind of dismiss it like, well, we don't need to show the spaceship, so we're not going to have one. No, they wanted to show all the sets and the sort of interiors of this spaceship, and even the way some of the shots are composed. You could see at least they were trying. They weren't being lazy about it. They weren't just going by what you would expect to see. They were trying something different. And so I give it points for that. But otherwise, I mean, it really, you got to just remember, like this is someone's either first film or very early film, and they hadn't quite figured out a lot of the practical ways to film some of this stuff. And even to the point where I feel like the way things are assembled, it feels like one of those instances where it's very kind of free of convention. And I appreciate that kind of thing. I think that makes it even more inventive and more imaginative when it's like, well, I'm not doing this the way you would normally do it, either because I don't know how you would normally do it, or I don't have the money to do it the way you would normally do it. So I'm going to do it a different way. And it's just going to be what it is. And to me, that is exciting. I don't know. There's something about it. It's like, yeah, go for it, man. Do it. Try it. I give it points for that. After seeing Dark Star, I said, well, what else is kind of in this lane? Maybe from this era. It's a little tricky because a lot of films in the 70s, even into the 80s, they were just, they're leaning on Star Wars. They're trying to cash in on that. I did find this film called Galaxy of Terror. I feel like there are films that have come since this that have probably tried to iterate on this idea. This idea of this ship, and we've got the crew, and they're out in space, and things start happening. There's murder, there's intrigue, but the crew, they start to experience these, these events or like visions or situations where it's their mind kind of playing tricks on them, right? And you could say, well, that's clearly like Event Horizon. Right? I think Event Horizon was someone taking another stab at this thing. And honestly, doing it better. And even Sunshine, I think, in a way. But, here, it's not, I don't think it's a great film. But, there's a point in this film where I feel like it's less of a Star Wars knockoff. It's more of an Alien knockoff. And so that's where I feel like, well, all right, man. I mean, at least you're taking inspiration from a good place, I suppose. But the execution is where this one falls short. I mean, it's just so kind of shabbily done. It's really hard to kind of sit through. And, maybe on a camp level or like a so bad it's good level, you can enjoy it. But it really doesn't stand the test of time. So I said, all right, well, I got to jump forward. I feel like that's kind of I'm going to get into a minefield just running through the 70s and 80s looking for these kinds of films and expecting a lot of good stuff that I haven't already seen. That's always the asterisk on this is like, there's a lot of the stuff I've already seen. So let me jump forward. Let me get into more current times, some stuff that I just have is kind of gone under my radar. And one of those films is The Last Days on Mars. And my memory serves, there was a little bit of a rash of films that came out. I want to say maybe around late 90s or 2000s, where there was a lot of films that were about Mars, but they were also not just like traveling to Mars, but it was like science fiction / horror / fantasy. There was Mission to Mars from Brian De Palma. There was John Carpenter's Ghosts of Mars, right? There was, The Martian came way after, I guess. And that was like purely science fiction. But I'm drawing a blank. There's another one that's about Mars, and it's kind of like a horror-ish type of film. And yet, a lot of these, I just felt like they were kind of just taking different, angles on the same idea. This one, The Last Days on Mars, it's actually a little bit different. It's not necessarily like some alien force, although I guess it sort of is when you get down to it, but it presents itself as more of like a zombie movie. Like this crew of this mission on Mars, they're there, things start to go wrong, and then turns out some of the crew get I guess they get taken by these creatures and they're turned into zombies, and then the survivors are trying to like fend them off and stay alive. And it's one of those things where you kind of know where this is going. You kind of feel the pattern playing out. But I thought it was just different enough where I hadn't really seen this before, like zombies on Mars. Okay, we'll do it. But also done pretty slickly. I mean, it looks like a independent, like kind of a lower budget film, but it's got a solid cast in it. All the visual effects and the sets and everything look pretty solid. So it's just a matter of like, well, it kind of starts to devolve into this zombie thriller, which is fine. But I think it started out on a little bit of a higher track of like, it's about the crew and it's about their relationships with each other, their dynamic with each other, and them trying to sort out and survive the situation. But then it turns into like a monster movie. And I'm okay with it. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a good movie. But I felt like I wanted a little bit something more out of it. And so then after that, I watched this movie called Apollo 18, which, I'll just say very quickly, I suppose, it's kind of a similar thing. It takes the approach of the found footage format as if this were the actual real Apollo 18 mission that didn't happen, and shows us maybe what really happened on that mission through all the found footage kind of assembled and edited together. And we see the crew and we see their strange discoveries on the moon. And also it is kind of an alien / zombie film at its core. And, I gotta say, I mean, it's a very similar type of approach. I think I give this one some bonus points for really committing to the bit, though. There are some found footage films that you can feel like they're a little manufactured, right? You can see the artifice in it. And this one, for the visual effects and for the sets and the way it's all kind of stitched together, even the acting, the Apollo era space crews, it was like basically just 3 generic white guys. And that is what we get with the cast in this film. They're not particularly individuals. They're just 3 of kind of the same guy. That you have different ideas of what they need to do to survive this situation or whatever. But, there's nothing really that stands out about them. And yet I feel like that's authentic to the idea here. And so really it's about the execution, I think, with this film. And it works for the most part. It does feel pretty well done, for the conceit of being a found footage film and being like really taking place on the surface of the moon, in the lunar module, in the lander, and all of the mechanics and the sort of logistical things that those crews really had to deal with. We saw some of that in other films, maybe most famously like Apollo 13, right? But, that's a well-documented time and part of American history. And so to see it taken into this horror sci-fi genre and with the found footage wrap around it, I thought it was kind of an interesting take, but I think it's a nice approach to try and tell a story like this in a little bit of a novel way. And so the last one, oh no, I take it back, not the last one. There's one more here, Rubicon. This is a film that came out in 2022, so we're getting a little more current. And this was one that, sort of like I.S.S, is a very similar premise. You got this crew on a space station, they're in orbit around the planet, and they're doing this scientific, I don't know, research or experiments with this algae, and they're like using it and they're growing it and studying it. And meanwhile, on Earth, on the surface, you see there's like a, I don't know, it kind of represents itself as like a fog that just like clouds the whole surface and takes over Earth. And they're trying to figure out like what's going on down there. They're not getting clear communications or ideas of what is happening. And it turns out this algae that they're growing in the space station may have something to do with it, may be able to change it or stop it. And I saw this movie a little while ago. My memory is that they have to then decide, do they try to go back to the surface, like land on Earth and do something, possibly change the course of this, or do they just stay in orbit and watch, everybody on Earth die? And that kind of becomes the main dramatic conflict of the film. By the end of the film, if I remember right, the decision is like, yeah, they're going to do it. They're going to go. But things start going wrong. Everything kind of comes apart. And I thought, well, it's a little bit of a different, it's a little more science fiction-y, but it's similar to I.S.S. in the sense of like, you're kind of watching this play out, hundreds of miles below you or whatever it is, but you're helpless to do anything about it. And if you were able to do something, would you risk your life to do it? That's kind of the central theme of the film, I think, or both of those films, really. But Rubicon kind of takes a little more of a horror, science fiction-y angle. And I think I like the approach of I.S.S. a little more, of like, let's keep it a little more grounded, a little more like, how would this realistically play out? I think with Rubicon, it has the thing that is sort of missing from I.S.S. I think we have a little bit better dynamic and chemistry with the cast, with the actors. So you feel a little more dramatic tension when things start to go wrong. And so the last film that I want to talk about here, which honestly was a surprise, and I'm saving it for last because I feel like it's the one that has the most kind of meat on the bones, It's a film from 2018 called Aniara. Look this film up. If you look at the cover art for this film, it's kind of odd. It's mesmerizing. It's not a piece of art that indicates at all what this film is about. And that's okay. That is honestly what drew me to it at first. I said, well, what is this film? I read the description. Oh, this sounds interesting. It's a film about, essentially, this like luxury space cruise liner, if you will, for lack of a better term. These hundreds or maybe even thousands of people board this spaceship, and we watch this play out in the sense of these people, these families, these friends, these people that are on this trip, and we see kind of the day-to-day, we see the amenities, we see the luxuries that they live with. But then we start to see some things start to go wrong. And if you've ever been on like a cruise or like any kind of a vacation type of resort situation, the idea of like, well, this is all inclusive and everything is taken care of and you just sit back and relax and we're going to have a nice time and enjoy the ride, that kind of thing. As soon as one little thing is off, it starts to, you start to feel like you see other things, and then other things start to go wrong and something doesn't feel right. If you play it out long enough, well, things start to spin out of control. And that's kind of what happens in this film. And it's done in just a smart and wry sort of way. There is a certain level of satire in this film that is very sharp. It's got a lot of bite to it. It's commenting on these sort of, I don't know, the approach to like privilege and wealth and luxury And there are elements that kind of remind me a little bit of something like Triangle of Sadness. Some of these films that poke a little bit at whether it's the people who feel entitled to live a certain way or the people who have to serve those people and do it begrudgingly, right? And when you see that dynamic play out, and these people are essentially trapped on this ship, and then the ship goes off course and they start to kind of lose their way. And I mean, talk about playing the story out on the longest possible timeline. Man, that is the thing that caught me at the end of this film. I mean, you go through the whole film and you're watching these things, these people and the situation sort of devolve over maybe days, then weeks, then months, and then even years. And the film keeps going. It keeps showing you like, no, we're not done yet. Let's see what happened 10 years later. No, still not done yet. Let's see what happened even further down the road. Still not done yet. Let's see how far we can take this. And to me, that was the thing that got me. Because it's like, when do you see that in a film? When do you see someone bold enough to tell a story and just not let it go? No, let's play this out as long as we possibly can. It is about what happens ultimately, like in the end. It's not a big part of the film. It's like the last, 15 minutes of the film. But the fact that it does it, to me, is just such a magnificent choice. It's like there's no other way you should have told this story. This is perfect. And so for me, I guess, hey, if there's a winner, it's this film. So this is the one, you take this idea of the genre of people trapped on a ship, trapped in a situation, and how do they get out of it? How do they fix it? What do they do? This is the one. Now, it's cynical as all hell, but I think it works the best. And even the cast, even the writing, even the production design, everything is like solid. It's there. It works. So that's my recommendation, I think. You could probably find it. I think I saw it like on Max or maybe Amazon Prime, one of those. It might even be on multiple ones. I don't know. But I think it's a pretty great film. And it's one that, honestly, I'd probably want to watch again soon. And it's not outright like horror. It's not necessarily bloody or gory or anything like that. There's no monsters in it. But it is about that kind of weird, strange terror that comes when people are trapped together. So anyway, that's what I've been seeing recently. Go to filmstreak.com if you want to see some other episodes. We talked about some other films here. I've got some other interesting horror franchises I want to talk about. So stay tuned for those. In the meantime, hey, go to filmstreak.com, find those other episodes. You can subscribe there, sign up to get these by email if you like. You can get the list that has all of these films on IMDb. Over 500 films I've seen now talked about here. You can add those to your list or rate them or see where they're streaming or available to watch. And, hey, in the meantime, go watch something new.